The slaver's whip cracked in the autumn air, and Willem Yates felt his calloused hands tighten around the fence post he had been mending, every muscle in his body going rigid at the sound that carried across the field from the village square. He should have kept working. The harvest was barely finished, the wheat still needed threshing, and winter would not wait for a man to sort out his conscience. But something about that particular crack of leather against wood made him set down his tools and walk toward the commotion, his boots crunching through the stubble of his recently cleared field. The walk from his small farm to the village center took nearly 20 minutes, and with each step, Willem told himself he would turn back, that whatever was happening in the square was none of his concern, that a man who kept to himself and his land did not get involved in the ugly business that sometimes passed through their frontier settlement. The crowd had already gathered by the time he arrived, a loose circle of curious onlookers, and a few men who looked like they might have silver in their pockets and cruelty in their hearts. In the center of it all stood a wagon with iron bars forming a cage in its bed, and inside that cage huddled three figures that made Willem's stomach turn. Two were goblins, small and wretched, their yellow eyes darting with feral fear. But the third was an orc girl, and she sat with her back straight and her chin up despite the chains around her wrists and ankles. She could not have been more than 19 or 20 summers, her green skin bearing the marks of recent hardship, bruises blooming purple-black along her arms, a cut above her eye that had scabbed over poorly. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her lower lip, and her black hair had been roughly shorn, uneven lengths falling around pointed ears. She wore little more than rags, a torn tunic that might have once been brown but was now the color of old blood and road dust. But it was her eyes that caught Willem and would not let him go, dark amber eyes that held no pleading, no tears, just a terrible resigned dignity that said she knew exactly what fate awaited her, and had accepted it with the grim certainty of someone who had run out of hope long ago. Fine specimens, all three. The slaver was a portly man with greasy hair slicked back from a sweating forehead, his voice carrying the practiced cheer of someone who sold misery for profit. The goblins are good for mine work, small hands, you see, get into tight spaces. 3 silver each, and that's practically stealing from me, gentlemen. As for the orc, well, she is strong as an ox, this one. Worked a lumber camp up north until they went bankrupt. 10 silver and she is yours, perfect for heavy labor, and she has not given me a lick of trouble the whole journey south. 10 silver. Willem knew the sum well enough. It was more than most farmers in this region saw in half a year, more than he had in his strongbox even after a good harvest. It was an amount meant to keep people like him from interfering, a price set high enough that only merchants or minor nobles could afford such a purchase. Does she speak common? A lean man in a merchant's coat stepped forward, circling the cage with the calculating eye of someone evaluating livestock. The slaver grinned, showing yellow teeth. Oh, she speaks it right enough. Raised in one of those integrated camps before the wars heated up again. Tell the nice gentleman your name, orc. The girl's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath green skin, and for a long moment Willem thought she would not answer. Then, in a voice rough from disuse but clear enough, she said, Orthala. Orthala, exotic, is it not? The slaver slapped the bars of the cage, making one of the goblins shriek and cower. Orthala did not flinch. She understands orders, follows them well enough. A bit of spirit, but nothing a firm hand cannot manage. The merchant hummed, unconvinced. 10 silver is steep for an orc, no matter how strong. They are prone to violence, everyone knows. What assurance do I have she will not gut me in my sleep? Look at her, sir. Does she look like she has any fight left? The slaver's voice took on a wheedling quality. Besides, I have a binding collar available for an extra 2 silver. Old magic keeps them docile, prevents any thoughts of rebellion. Completely safe, I assure you." Willem felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. He had seen binding collars before, during his time in the territorial militia. They were cruel things, sapping will and personality, turning thinking beings into hollow shells. The army had used them on orc prisoners sometimes, and Willem had hated it then, though he had been too young and too low in rank to voice his objections. The merchant scratched his chin, considering. Around the square, other men were evaluating the merchandise as well, discussing prices and potential uses in low voices that made Willem's skin crawl. This was not the first time slavers had come through their settlement, though it had been several years. The practice was not exactly legal in this region, but the local magistrate was 3 days' ride away and had never shown much interest in enforcing the more humanitarian proclamations from the distant capital. "I will give you 7 silver for her. No collar needed," another voice called out. A farmer Willem recognized vaguely, a man named Hoskins who had a reputation for working his hired hands to exhaustion and paying them poorly. "7, my dear fellow, you insult me. This is prime stock, not some half-starved waif. 10 silver, and that is my final price." The haggling continued, voices rising and falling, and through it all Orthala sat motionless in her cage, her amber eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. Willem wondered what she saw there, if she was remembering a life before chains, before whatever circumstances had led her to this cage in this forgotten frontier village. He wondered if she had family somewhere, if anyone in the world would mourn whatever became of her after today. He should walk away. Willem knew this with the certainty of a man who had spent 32 years learning to recognize trouble and avoid it. He was not wealthy, not influential, just a farmer trying to scratch a living from rocky soil at the edge of civilization. He had no wife, no children, nothing but his land and his small farmhouse and the animals he tended. Getting involved in this would be foolish, possibly dangerous, certainly impractical. But he kept seeing those amber eyes, kept thinking about binding collars and cruel masters, and a girl who sat with her spine straight despite everything the world had done to her. "I have a bid," Hoskins shouted, and Willem realized with a start that the farmer had raised his offer to 8 silver, clearly determined to make the purchase. The slaver was grinning now, sensing the possibility of a full-price sale if he could just push a bit harder. Willem's feet carried him forward before his mind could catch up, shouldering through the crowd until he stood at the front, close enough to see the rust on the cage bars, close enough to see the way Orthala's breathing had gone shallow and quick, despite her composed exterior. "I will pay your 10 silver," Willem heard himself say, his voice sounding strange in his own ears, too loud, too firm, but not in coin. The slaver's eyes narrowed with suspicion and interest. "Oh, and what exactly are you offering, farmer?" "My harvest, all of it. 40 bushels of wheat, 20 of barley, 10 of oats, already threshed and sacked, highest quality grain in this settlement." The words came steady now, even though Willem's heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. "It is worth 15 silver at market prices, possibly 20 if you find the right buyer in the southern cities." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hoskins sputtered in outrage. "That is cheating. The price is 10 silver, not goods." The slaver held up a hand, his expression thoughtful. Now, let us not be hasty. I do deal in trade goods as well as coin. The question is, farmer, why would I want to haul 70 bushels of grain when silver is so much lighter?" "Because grain is worth more," Willem said, fighting to keep his voice level. "You know it as well as I do. Silver is just metal. Grain is food and winter is coming. You can sell my harvest in any city for double what you would get for 10 silver, and you have a wagon already, space to haul it. I can have it loaded for you by nightfall." The slaver rubbed his chin, calculation gleaming in his eyes. Around them, the crowd had gone quiet, watching this unexpected development. Willem could feel their stares, could practically hear them thinking that he had lost his mind, offering an entire season's work for a single orc slave. Maybe he had lost his mind. That harvest represented 6 months of labor, from spring planting through summer growing and autumn reaping. It was his food for the winter, his seed for next year's planting, his only real asset besides the land itself. Without it, he would be surviving on his small vegetable garden, the eggs from his chickens, and whatever game he could hunt or trap. It would be a lean winter, possibly a dangerous one if the snows came hard. But then Orthala shifted slightly in her cage, the chains clinking, and Willem caught a glimpse of welts on her back through the torn tunic, marks of whip and lash. He thought about what would happen if Hoskins bought her, or the merchant with his talk of binding collars. He thought about the resigned hopelessness in those amber eyes, and he knew he could not walk away. 15 silver worth of grain for a 10 silver orc, the slaver mused aloud. You drive a hard bargain, farmer. But I have overhead, transport costs, and I would need to verify the quality of your grain before I agree to anything. Come see it now, Willem offered. My farm is a 20-minute walk. You can inspect every bushel, take samples if you want. If the quality does not meet your standards, we have no deal, and you can sell the girl to whoever else wants her. This was the gamble. If the slaver agreed to come inspect the grain, it would take time, and there was a chance he would lose interest, or another buyer would make a cash offer he could not refuse. But if Willem could get him to the farm, show him the quality of the harvest, the sheer quantity of it, greed might overcome convenience. The slaver studied Willem with an intensity that made him feel like his soul was being appraised and found wanting. Then, abruptly, the man smiled. You know what, farmer? I like your spirit. It is not often I meet a man willing to part with his whole livelihood for a slave. You must have plans for her, eh? Strong back like that, I imagine she could work your farm quite efficiently. Willem said nothing, knowing that any explanation he offered would sound either foolish or suspicious. Let the slaver think what he wanted, so long as he agreed to the deal. Very well. I will come see this magnificent harvest of yours, but I am bringing the merchandise with me. Cannot leave valuable property unguarded in this square, you understand. The slaver gestured to a younger man who had been standing by the wagon, clearly an assistant or guard. Rowan, get the wagon ready to move. We are taking a short trip to inspect some grain. The next 20 minutes passed in a strange haze of unreality. Willem led the way back to his farm, very aware of the wagon creaking along behind him, the iron cage rattling with every bump in the road. He did not look back at Orthala, did not trust himself to meet those amber eyes, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing. His farm was not impressive by any standard. A small wooden house with a stone chimney, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a chicken coop, a pig pen, and fields that stretched out in neat rectangular plots, now brown and stubbled from the recent harvest. The grain was stored in the barn, sacks of it piled carefully to keep dry and safe from rodents, the work of the past month of threshing and winnowing. The slaver climbed down from the wagon and approached the barn with the air of a man who had been disappointed before and expected to be again. Willem opened the wide double doors and gestured inside. See for yourself. For the next hour, The slaver poked and prodded through the grain stores, opening sacks at random, running his hands through the wheat and barley, even biting into kernels to test their quality. His assistant stood guard by the wagon, a cudgel hanging from his belt, watching Willem with suspicious eyes. Through the bars of the cage, the two goblins whimpered and shuffled, but Orthala remained still, her gaze now fixed on Willem's house as if memorizing every detail. Finally, the slaver straightened, brushing chaff from his hands. "I will admit, farmer, you did not exaggerate. This is good grain, very good. Properly dried, no mold, no weevils. I can get 20 silver for this lot in the southern markets, possibly 25. Then we have a deal." Willem asked, his mouth dry. "We have a deal," the slaver agreed, extending a hand. 70 bushels of grain for one orc slave, as is no refunds or exchanges. They shook on it, and Willem felt the weight of what he had just done settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The slaver was grinning now, clearly pleased with his end of the bargain. "Rowan, start loading the grain. Farmer, I will need you to help. Faster we get this done, faster we can be on our way." Loading 70 bushels of grain into a wagon took the better part of 2 hours. The sacks were heavy, 50 pounds each, and had to be carefully stacked to balance the weight. They had to unload the cage with the 3 captives first, setting it on the ground beside Willem's house. The goblins immediately tried to make themselves as small as possible in the corner of the cage, but Orthala stood, her chains clinking, and watched the proceedings with those unnervingly steady amber eyes. By the time the last sack was secured, and the wagon groaned under the weight of Willem's entire harvest, the sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The slaver wiped sweat from his brow and surveyed his haul with obvious satisfaction. "Pleasure doing business with you, farmer. She is all yours." He gestured to the cage. "The cage is mine, but the chains you can keep. Consider them a gift." "The goblins," Willem said, surprising himself. "What are you asking for them?" The slaver's eyebrows rose. "Getting greedy, are we?" 3 silver each, I told you." "I do not have silver, but I have livestock. 2 pigs worth about 6 silver together." For a moment the slaver looked incredulous. Then he laughed, a great rolling belly laugh that made him bend over wheezing. "You are serious? You actually want the goblins too?" "Farmer, I do not know if you are the most compassionate man I have ever met or the most insane. Probably both." "Is it a deal or not?" Willem pressed, fighting down the embarrassment burning in his cheeks. The slaver considered, still chuckling. "You know what, why not? This has been the most entertaining transaction I have had in months, and pork is pork. Show me these pigs." The pigs were in their pen behind the barn, 2 fattened sows that Willem had been planning to slaughter for winter meat. There went that plan, he thought distantly, as the slaver inspected them and declared them acceptable. Rowan had to fashion a crude pen in the back of the wagon for the pigs, using some of the wood from the fence rails. Willem would need to repair that later, he noted absently, adding it to the growing list of problems he had just created for himself. Finally, as the last light of day turned red and bloody on the horizon, the slaver's wagon pulled away from Willem's farm, laden with grain and pigs, significantly lighter by 3 captives. The slaver called back cheerfully, "Good luck with your new workers, farmer. You are going to need it." Then they were gone, wheels creaking down the road, and Willem was left standing in his yard with a locked iron cage containing 1 orc and 2 goblins. No food stores for winter, no meat animals, and no clear idea what he had just done or why. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. The goblins stared at Willem with wide, terrified eyes. Orthala stood at the bars of the cage, her hands wrapped around the iron, her expression unreadable. Willem cleared his throat. Right. Let me get the keys and get you out of there. The slaver had tossed him a ring of small keys before leaving, and Willem fumbled with them now, his hands less steady than he would have liked. It took 3 tries to find the right key for the cage lock, and when he swung the door open, the goblins immediately bolted, scrambling out and racing for the woods beyond his fields so fast they were just blurs of motion in the gathering dusk. Wait. Willem called after them, but they were already gone, vanished into the forest. He sighed. Well, I suppose that is their choice. Orthala stepped out of the cage slowly, her movements stiff from hours of confinement. She was taller than Willem had realized, easily matching his own height of just over 6 feet, her shoulders broad and muscular, despite obvious malnourishment. The chains on her wrists and ankles clinked with each movement, heavy iron links that had rubbed her skin raw in places. Sit, Willem said, gesturing to the porch steps of his house. Let me get those chains off. She regarded him warily but obeyed, lowering herself onto the wooden steps with a caution that spoke of old injuries or exhaustion or both. Willem knelt in front of her, very aware of how vulnerable a position this was, how easily she could kick him in the head or grab the knife at his belt. The keys for the manacles were smaller, more delicate, and his fingers felt too large and clumsy as he worked at the lock on her right wrist. Why? Orthala asked suddenly, her voice hoarse. Why did you do that? The grain, the pigs, that was your livelihood. Willem did not look up from the lock, focusing on the mechanism. I could not stand by and watch. You do not know me. I could be exactly what they said, violent, dangerous. I could kill you the moment these chains are off. The lock clicked open and the right manacle fell away. Willem moved to her left wrist. Will you? A pause. No. Then I guess I made the right gamble. The second manacle came free and he moved to her ankles. When did you last eat? Yesterday morning. Stale bread and water. The ankle chains were harder, the lock stiff with rust and road grime. Willem had to work at them, jiggling the key, applying pressure. There is not much in the house right now, but I have eggs and some vegetables. I can make a stew. You are talking about food. You just gave away your entire harvest and you are talking about feeding me. Orthala's voice held an edge of something that might have been disbelief or suppressed hysteria. What kind of fool are you? The kind who does not think things through very well, apparently. The last lock gave way with a rusty shriek, and the ankle chains fell to the ground in a heavy heap. Willem gathered them up and tossed them back into the now empty cage. There. You are free. The forest is that way if you want to run like the goblins did. The village is back the way we came. I would not recommend that direction, given the reception you would likely get. Or you can come inside, eat something, and we can figure out what happens next. Orthala rubbed her wrists where the manacles had been, her amber eyes fixed on Willem's face with an intensity that made him want to look away. You are serious. You are actually offering me a choice. Of course I am. What did you think? I spent my whole harvest just to lock you up somewhere else. I thought. She trailed off, then shook her head. I do not know what I thought. Nothing makes sense. Welcome to the club. Willem stood, his knees protesting the kneeling position. I am going inside to start that stew. You can join me or not, your choice. But for what it is worth, I could use the company. It gets quiet out here by yourself. He did not wait for her answer, just turned and walked into his house, leaving the door open behind him. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline singing through his veins, and his hands shook slightly as he pulled out his cooking pot and began filling it with water from the bucket by the door. He had not been lying about the food situation. With the grain gone and the pigs sold, his stores were desperately low. There were eggs from the chickens, some carrots and turnips and onions from his vegetable garden, a bit of dried herbs, a few withered potatoes. Enough for a thin stew, at least for tonight. He heard the soft tread of footsteps behind him and knew without looking that Orthala had made her choice. She stood in the doorway, her frame filling it, silhouetted against the last purple light of dusk. "I will stay," she said quietly. "For tonight, at least. I owe you that much, I think. A chance to understand why you did what you did." "Fair enough." Willem began chopping vegetables, the familiar rhythm of the knife against the cutting board soothing his jangled nerves. "There is a well out back if you want to wash up. Clean clothes are in the chest by the bed. They will be too small for you probably, but better than what you are wearing." She looked down at her torn, filthy tunic as if seeing it for the first time. "Yes, thank you." Orthala disappeared into the back room, and Willem heard the sounds of her moving around, the creak of the chest opening, the rustle of fabric. He focused on the cooking, dicing the vegetables small to make them stretch further, adding water and herbs and the last precious pinch of salt from his dwindling supply. By the time she returned, he had a pot bubbling over the fire and was cracking eggs into it, stirring to create ribbons of cooked egg through the broth. She had changed into one of his work shirts and a pair of trousers that ended well above her ankles, the shirt straining across her shoulders. Her shorn hair was wet from washing, dripping onto the collar. Even cleaned up and dressed, she looked like someone who had been through hell, her green skin marked with bruises, her movements careful and guarded. They ate in silence, sitting on stools by the fire, the stew divided between two wooden bowls. It was not much, thin and bland, but Orthala ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. Willem watched her from the corner of his eye and tried not to think about how badly he had just disrupted his life, how he would explain this to the few neighbors he had, what the hell he was going to do when winter came and his stores were empty. "I was part of a work crew at a lumber operation in the Northern Territories," Orthala said suddenly, breaking the long silence. "Mixed crew, orcs and humans and a few half-breeds. The company went bankrupt 3 months ago, could not pay our wages. Most of the humans found other work, but the orcs were not so lucky. Lots of towns up north do not want our kind around, treaty or no treaty. I was trying to make my way south, heard there might be work in the border regions, places desperate enough to hire anyone. Got jumped by those slavers about 2 weeks ago along with maybe a dozen others. They have been selling us off settlement by settlement." "I am sorry," Willem said quietly. "That should not happen to anyone, but it does. It happens all the time." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "I am actually one of the lucky ones, you know. I was not born into slavery. I had almost 20 years of freedom. Some of my people do not even get that." Willem had no answer to that, no comforting words that would not sound hollow. So he just nodded and finished his stew, and after a moment Orthala did the same. "You can have the bed," Willem said when the bowls were empty and washed and set aside. "I will sleep out here by the fire." "That is your bed, your house. I am not taking it. You are injured and exhausted." "I am fine on the floor. I have done it before." He was already pulling out a thin bedroll from the storage chest, spreading it on the wooden planks. "No arguments. Consider it part of the deal." "What deal? You bought me, freed me, fed me. I have given you nothing in return. You stayed." "You are talking to me like I am a person, not a monster or a fool. That is more than I expected, honestly." Willem settled onto the bedroll, pulling a blanket over himself. The fire crackled and popped, shadows dancing on the walls. "Get some sleep, Orthala. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." She stood there for a long moment, looking down at him with an expression he could not read. Then she nodded slowly and moved to the back room, closing the door softly behind her. Willem lay in the dark, listening to the old house settle around him, wondering what he had started and whether he would regret it. He fell asleep trying to calculate how much food he had left and how long it might last, the numbers blurring together into dreams of empty larders and endless winter snow. Morning came cold and gray, with frost on the windows and the smell of the dying fire acrid in the air. Willem woke stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard floor, his back protesting as he sat up and stretched. The door to the back room was still closed, no sound coming from within. He rebuilt the fire, started water heating for tea from his dwindling supply of dried leaves, and was debating whether to wake Orthala when the door opened. She looked better than the night before, the sleep having eased some of the exhaustion from her face, though the bruises and cuts remained vivid against her green skin. She had kept on his borrowed clothes, and in the morning light he could see how truly ill-fitting they were, the seams straining. "Morning," Willem offered. "Tea, please." She accepted the cup he poured, wrapping her large hands around it. "I need to tell you something. I am not planning to stay here long term. I appreciate what you did more than I can say, but I cannot be your burden. Once I have rested a few days, regained some strength, I will move on. Head further south, find work somewhere." Willem felt something sink in his chest, though he could not have said why. "You are not a burden, and you are welcome to stay as long as you want." "With what food?" "You gave away your harvest for me. I will not be the reason you starve this winter." "I will manage. I always do." He sipped his own tea, the weak brew barely flavored. "But if you are set on leaving, I will not stop you. Like I said, your choice." They lapsed into uncomfortable silence, both nursing their tea, neither quite willing to meet the other's eyes. Finally, Orthala set down her cup with a decisive clink. "Let me help while I am here at least. I am strong, like the slaver said. I can chop wood, mend fences, whatever needs doing." "Let me work off the debt." "There is no debt," Willem protested. "There is to me." Her amber eyes were fierce now, determined. "You spent everything you had. The least I can do is make sure your farm is in good shape before winter comes. That is not negotiable." Willem recognized the stubborn set of her jaw, the squared shoulders. He had seen that same look in the mirror often enough when his mind was made up about something. "All right," he conceded. "If it makes you feel better, I will not turn down the help. The wood shed needs stocking, and there are definitely fences that need mending." So they fell into an unexpected routine. Orthala attacked the work with an intensity that was almost frightening, chopping wood with powerful, efficient strokes that sent logs splitting clean and true, hauling the pieces to the wood shed in loads that would have taken Willem 3 trips to manage. She mended the fence where Willem had pulled rails for the slaver's wagon, then went on to repair other sections that had been listing or loose. She cleaned out the barn, organized the tools, even patched a hole in the chicken coop that Willem had been meaning to fix for weeks. Willem found himself working alongside her, trying to match her pace and failing. She was stronger than him, that much was obvious, her orc heritage giving her physical power that his merely human frame could not compete with. But more than that, she worked with the desperation of someone trying to prove something to herself or to him or to the world at large. They spoke little during those first few days, just the occasional comment about the work or requests to pass a tool. But Willem found himself growing comfortable with her presence, with the way she moved through his space like she belonged there, with the small sounds of her working nearby. On the 4th day, as they were repairing a section of the barn roof, Orthala suddenly asked, "Why do you live out here alone? No wife, no family." Willem paused in hammering a shingle into place. "Never found the right person, I guess, and after my time in the militia I wanted space, quiet. Somewhere away from people and politics and fighting." "You were a soldier." For about 6 years in my 20s. Territorial defense, mostly. We patrolled the border regions, dealt with raiders, occasionally got pulled into the bigger conflicts when the clans and kingdoms got into it. He did not mention that those conflicts had often involved fighting orc war parties, did not think it would help the fragile peace they had established. But Orthala was sharp. You fought my people. I fought raiders who happened to be orcs, yes. Also fought human bandits, goblin tribes, even a few rogue mages. I was not picky about who I killed back then. The words tasted bitter. I am not proud of that time in my life. It is part of why I came out here trying to find something better than violence. She was quiet for a moment, her hand stilling on the shingle she was positioning. At least you had a choice. Most orcs do not get to choose whether to fight or not. We are born into clans that are at war, or we are driven to it by humans who see us as monsters no matter what we do. You are right. That is not fair, and I am sorry for my part in it. Willem met her eyes, holding that amber gaze. I cannot change what I did during the war, but I am trying to be better now. By spending your harvest on a slave orc. By treating someone like a person when the rest of the world was ready to treat her like property. He returned to hammering. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Still does, honestly. They finished the roof in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before, less strained, more thoughtful. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating another thin stew, Orthala spoke again. The clan I was born into was destroyed when I was 10. War with a neighboring human kingdom. Most of my people were killed, the survivors scattered. I ended up in one of those integrated camps you mentioned, places where they tried to teach young orcs to be civilized, to live peacefully among humans. Her voice was distant, remembering. It was not all bad. I learned to read and write, learned a trade. But we were always reminded that we were there on sufferance, that one wrong move and we would be thrown out. And when the camp closed down due to funding issues, that is exactly what happened. We were civilized enough to work for low wages, but not civilized enough to be treated as equals. That is a terrible way to grow up, Willem said softly. It is the only way I know. But sometimes in those camps, I would hear stories from the older orcs about what life was like before the wars, when some clans lived in peace with human settlements, when mixed communities were possible. I used to think they were just fairy tales, wishful thinking. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Now I do not know what to think. The moment stretched between them, fragile and laden with meanings Willem did not quite know how to parse. Then a log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, and the spell broke. Over the following days, as autumn deepened, and the first hard frosts came, they continued to work on preparing the farm for winter. But the nature of their conversations began to change, opening up in small increments. Orthala told him about the lumber camp, the friends she had made there and lost when the operation shut down. Willem told her about growing up on a farm much like this one, about the restlessness that had driven him to join the militia, the disillusionment that had driven him to leave. They discovered shared interests, a mutual appreciation for early mornings when the world was quiet, a similar dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. Orthala had a gift for deadpan observations that caught Willem off guard and made him laugh, real laughter that he had not experienced in longer than he cared to admit. Willem, in turn, found that he could make her smile, a small, hesitant expression that transformed her face, softening the hard edges that life had carved into her. But underlying everything was the unspoken knowledge that this was temporary. Orthala still spoke of leaving, of moving on once she had regained her strength and worked off what she considered her debt. And Willem, despite the growing ache in his chest at the thought of her absence, did not argue, He had no right to ask her to stay, no claim on her beyond the simple fact that he had purchased her freedom. Love, if that was even what this confusing tangle of feelings was, did not entitle him to anything. 3 weeks after Orthala's arrival, the first snow came, light flurries that dusted the brown fields white and melted by noon. They were in the barn when it started, sorting through the last of Willem's equipment and supplies, taking stock of what the winter would require. "Your food situation is worse than I thought," Orthala said bluntly, looking at the nearly empty storage shelves. "You have maybe enough here for a month, 2 if you stretch it. I know." Willem had been avoiding thinking about it too hard, but the numbers did not lie. "I will do some hunting, set traps. There is usually decent game in the woods if you know where to look. And if there is not, if this is a hard winter and the animals hole up, then I will manage. I always do." Orthala turned to face him, her expression serious. "Stop saying that. You are not managing, you are slowly starving yourself. And for what? For me, an orc you do not even know, who is going to leave anyway." "Maybe I do not want you to leave," Willem said, the words escaping before he could stop them. The admission hung in the cold barn air between them. Orthala's eyes widened slightly, and Willem felt heat rising to his face despite the chill. "You do not mean that," she said quietly. "I do." There was no point in taking it back now. "I know it is crazy. We have known each other less than a month. You are an orc. I am human. The whole world would say this is wrong or impossible or both. But I have not felt this way about anyone in my entire life, and I think maybe you feel something too, or I am reading this completely wrong and about to make a massive fool of myself." Orthala was very still, her breathing shallow. "Willem, you do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know before you leave that these past weeks have mattered to me. You matter to me." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "But I am not going to trap you here with obligation or guilt. When you are ready to go, I will help you prepare supplies, wish you well, and let you walk away. That is a promise." For a long moment she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she crossed the space between them, close enough that he could see the exact shade of amber in her eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her tusks pressed against her lower lip. "I have spent my whole life learning not to trust humans," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Learning to protect myself, to stay closed off, because opening up just leads to pain. And then you come along and shatter all of that. You are infuriating and confusing, and you make me want things I have no right to want." "What things?" Willem asked, his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. "This." She leaned forward and kissed him, her lips pressing against his with a tentative gentleness that quickly deepened into something urgent and hungry. Willem's hands came up to her shoulders, feeling the solid strength of her, and she pulled him closer, one hand sliding into his hair. The kiss lasted an eternity and a heartbeat, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willem felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "I am still leaving," Orthala said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have to. I cannot stay here and watch you starve because of me." "Then let me come with you." The idea formed even as he spoke it, sudden and wild but somehow right. "We will go south together, find work. 2 people can survive easier than one, and I am tired of being alone on this farm anyway. You are talking about abandoning your land, your home. I am talking about choosing a future that is more than just surviving winter after winter in isolation." He took her hands in his, her green skin warm against his calloused palms. "I cannot promise it will be easy. People are going to have opinions about a human and an orc together. But I would rather face that with you than face another season alone." Orthala looked down at their joined hands, her expression a complicated mix of hope and fear and something that might have been the beginning of joy. "You are absolutely insane, you know that. I have been told that before." She laughed, a shaky sound that seemed to surprise her. "Okay, okay. We will try this, whatever this is, but we do it smart. We prepare properly, wait until after the first heavy snows pass, then head south in late winter when the roads are passable again. We hunt and preserve what we can, ration carefully. And if this winter gets too hard, we sell the farm and leave early. Agreed, agreed." Willem pulled her into another kiss, softer this time, savoring it. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go inside. It is getting cold. In a minute." Orthala held him close, her arms wrapped around him, and Willem could feel her heart beating against his chest. "I just need a minute to believe this is real." They stood there in the barn as snow fell outside, holding each other against the coming cold. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Willem felt something that might have been hope. Winter descended on the farm with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled in drifts against the house and temperatures that turned the well water to ice. Willem and Orthala fell into a new routine, one built around survival but also around each other. They woke early, tangled together in the too small bed that they now shared, generating warmth against the bitter cold. They checked the traps together, hunted in the woods when the weather permitted, preserved what little game they caught with smoking and salting techniques. The food situation remained desperate. Even with careful rationing and the occasional rabbit or squirrel from the traps, they were both losing weight, their clothes hanging looser, their energy flagging on the worst days. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. On the days when the snow was too heavy to venture out, they stayed inside, feeding the fire carefully to conserve wood, wrapped in blankets and each other. Orthala taught Willem some of the Orc language, the guttural syllables that felt strange in his mouth, but that made her smile when he got them right. Willem taught her some of the old songs his mother had sung, ballads about heroes and lost love and the turning of the seasons. They talked for hours, sharing histories and dreams and fears. Orthala spoke of wanting to find her scattered clan someday, to reconnect with the pieces of her broken heritage. Willem spoke of wanting to build something lasting, a place or a life that meant more than just subsistence. Together, they began to imagine what a future might look like, somewhere south where the winters were milder and mixed communities were more accepted, where an orc and a human might make a life without constant judgment. The physical intimacy between them grew as well, tentative at first but deepening with trust and time. Orthala was strong and sometimes she forgot, leaving bruises that Willem wore with pride because they meant she was letting herself be vulnerable with him. Willem learned the landscape of her body, the scars and marks that told the story of her life, and tried to show her with touch and kiss and whispered words that she was valued, cherished, beautiful in every way that mattered. "I never thought I could have this," she told him one night as they lay in the dark, the wind howling outside. "Growing up, the other orcs would talk about how we could only ever be with our own kind, and the humans made it clear they saw us as monsters. I thought I was destined to be alone or to settle for someone who could tolerate me at best. You are not alone anymore," Willem said, pulling her closer. "And tolerate is the wrong word. I am pretty sure I am in love with you, Orthala." He felt her breath catch, her body going still. "You cannot know that. We have only known each other a couple of months. I know what I feel. If that is not love yet, it is heading there fast enough." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "You do not have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." She turned in his arms to face him, her amber eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "I think I am in love with you too. It terrifies me, but I think I am." They kissed then, deep and slow, and made love with a tenderness that left them both shaking. Afterward, as they drifted toward sleep, Willem thought that maybe this was what happiness felt like, fragile and hard-won but real. The winter solstice came and went, the darkest day of the year passing with little fanfare beyond a small celebration they contrived from their meager stores. Orthala made a stew with the last of their potatoes, and a rabbit Willem had trapped, flavoring it with dried herbs and careful optimism. They ate by firelight and told each other stories of solstice celebrations from their respective cultures, finding common threads of light in darkness, of hope for the returning sun. In my clan, before it was destroyed, we would light a great bonfire on the longest night, Orthala said, her voice soft with memory. Everyone would come, and we would throw tokens into the fire, things we wanted to leave behind in the old year. Then we would dance until dawn, celebrating survival and community. What would you throw into the fire now if you could? Willem asked. She thought for a long moment. Fear, I think. Fear of the future, fear of loss, fear of being hurt. What about you? Loneliness, he said without hesitation. I have been alone for so long, even when I was surrounded by people. I would burn that away gladly. Orthala reached across and took his hand, squeezing gently. We are neither of us alone now. No, Willem agreed, squeezing back. We are not. As winter slowly, grudgingly began to release its grip, yielding to the first tentative signs of early spring, they began to make concrete plans for leaving. Willem knew the land was worth something, even unworked and remote as it was. There was a merchant in the village who sometimes brokered property deals, and when the roads cleared enough for travel, Willem made the journey to speak with him. The reception in the village was decidedly cold. News had spread, as news always did in small communities, about the farmer who had bought an orc slave and then freed her. The rumors had grown in the telling, some saying Willem was using her for labor he did not pay for, others whispering darker things. When he walked the main street, people turned away or watched him with open suspicion. The merchant, a shrewd man named Garrett, at least was willing to talk business. They met in the man's office, a cluttered room above the general store, and Willem laid out his proposition. I want to sell my farm. All of it, the land, the house, the outbuildings, whatever tools and equipment are left. I need the money before the spring planting season. Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying Willem with calculating eyes. That is a significant property. Under normal circumstances, I could probably get you a good price for it. But circumstances are not normal, are they? Word is you have an orc living with you. I do. Her name is Orthala, and we are planning to leave the area together, head south. That is why I am selling. Willem kept his voice level, refusing to show the anger simmering beneath the surface. An orc lover, Garrett said, not quite hiding his distaste. You realize that is going to make selling the property much harder. People around here have long memories and strong opinions. I realize that. I also realize my land is good, well situated, and worth a fair sum. I am not asking you to approve of my choices, just to do your job and broker a sale. Garrett was silent for a moment, then named a figure that was about half what the property should be worth. Willem countered, they haggled, and eventually settled on a sum that was low but not insulting. The merchant would put out word to interested buyers, draw up the paperwork, and hopefully have a sale concluded within a few weeks. Willem left the meeting feeling exhausted and angry, but at least progress had been made. He stopped by the general store to purchase a few supplies, spending the last of his hoarded coins on salt, flour, and a small bag of dried beans. The shopkeeper took his money but refused to meet his eyes, and the other customers gave him a wide berth. On the walk back to the farm, Willem encountered Jonas Ridley, one of his few neighbors, a man he had shared labor with during past harvests. Jonas was leading a mule loaded with supplies, and he stopped when he saw Willem, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Willem, heard you were selling up." "News travels fast," Willem said neutrally. "That is the truth. Also heard about your house guest." Jonas's tone was carefully controlled, but disapproval bled through. "An orc, Willem, really. Her name is Orthala, and yes, really." Willem was too tired for pretense. "We are leaving together as soon as the property sells. You have lost your mind, you know that, right?" "An orc is not a person. It is a beast that looks like a person. They are born killers, raiders, monsters. The fact that this one has not gutted you yet does not mean it will not. She is not in it, Jonas. She is a woman, intelligent and kind and worth 10 of most of the people in that village." Willem's voice was hard now, his patience fraying. "And I would appreciate it if you kept your opinions to yourself." Jonas shook his head slowly. "I am just trying to help. You are making a mistake that is going to follow you the rest of your life. But if you are determined to ruin yourself over a green-skinned freak, I suppose that is your business." Willem's fist connected with Jonas's jaw before he fully realized he was throwing the punch. The older man staggered back, more surprised than hurt, and the mule brayed in alarm. For a moment they stood there, Jonas holding his jaw, Willem breathing hard, his knuckles throbbing. "Do not," Willem said, his voice shaking with rage, "ever call her that again. Understood?" Jonas spat blood into the dirt. "Understood, and we are done, you and I. Do not expect any help from me or mine ever again." He led his mule away, leaving Willem standing alone on the road, his hand aching and his heart racing. He knew he had just burned another bridge, cut another tie to this community he had never quite fit into anyway. But he could not bring himself to regret it. When he got back to the farm, Orthala took one look at his face and his bruised knuckles and pulled him into her arms without a word. He held onto her and let the tension drain away, breathing in the familiar scent of her, smoke and earth and something uniquely her own. "Someone said something," she stated rather than asked. "Jonas called you a freak. I hit him. Willem." There was exasperation and affection in her voice. "You cannot punch everyone who says cruel things about me. There will not be enough hours in the day. I can try." He pulled back enough to look at her. "I am sorry. I know that probably made things worse. Maybe, or maybe it felt really good to stand up for me. I am choosing to believe the latter." She kissed his forehead. "How did the meeting with the merchant go?" He told her about the negotiations, the low price, the timeline for a potential sale. Orthala listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "So we might be leaving within the month," she said when he finished. "If we are lucky and someone wants to buy, could be longer. Where will we go?" It was a question they had danced around for weeks, making vague plans but no firm decisions. Willem considered it now, thinking about the maps he had seen during his militia days, the stories he had heard from travelers and merchants. "There are territories in the far south, near the coast, where the old treaties are still honored," he said slowly. "Mixed settlements, humans and orcs and other races living together. The land is supposed to be good for farming, and they say there is work for anyone willing to labor. It is a long journey, maybe 2 months of travel if we are walking." 2 months. Orthala's eyes were distant, calculating. "We will need supplies, good boots, camping gear, and funds to live on until we can establish ourselves. The sale of the farm should give us that if I can get a fair price, not a fortune, but enough to make a start. Then that is where we will go, together." She squeezed his hand. "I am scared, Willem, but also excited. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all. I feel the same way." He pulled her close again, resting his chin on top of her head. "We are going to make this work, Orthala, I promise you that." The weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Winter released its hold in fits and starts. Warm days followed by sudden freezes, the snow melting into mud that made the roads nearly impassable. Garrett sent word that there was interest in the property from a prospective buyer, a younger man looking to start his own farm, but negotiations were proceeding slowly. In the meantime, Willem and Orthala prepared as best they could. They went through the house and barn, sorting what to take and what to leave. Orthala mended their clothes, reinforcing seams and patching holes. Willem crafted a traveler's pack from old canvas and leather, designed to carry their supplies efficiently. They made lists, checked them obsessively, tried to anticipate every need and challenge of a long journey. They also stole what moments of happiness they could find. Orthala taught Willem to fight orc style, grappling techniques that used strength and leverage in ways his militia training had never covered. They tumbled through the muddy yard, laughing and cursing, and more than once their sparring turned into something else, frantic coupling in the dirt or grass that left them both breathless and grinning. Willem showed Orthala the first signs of spring, the tiny green shoots pushing up through the last patches of snow, the return of birds to the bare trees. She had a surprising knowledge of plants and their uses, legacy of her time in the integrated camps where they had taught practical skills. Together they foraged for early greens, supplementing their diminished stores with dandelion and wild onion and the tender shoots of ferns. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple, Orthala said quietly, "I want to marry you. Not now, not here, but when we get south, when we have a place that feels like home. I want to stand up in front of whatever community we find and say that you are mine and I am yours." Willem felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That is the best proposal I have ever heard." Which, to be fair, is the only proposal I have ever heard, but still. She elbowed him gently in the ribs. "I am being serious, so am I." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Yes, Orthala, when we reach the south, when we are settled, I will marry you with joy. We will find an officiant who does not care about species barriers, and we will make it official." "It is already official to me," she said softly. "But I like the idea of a ceremony, a public commitment, something that says we are not ashamed, not hiding." "We will never hide," Willem promised. "Not from the world, not from each other." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire, and Willem thought that this moment, right here, was worth everything he had given up and everything they would face. Finally, as the first truly warm days of spring arrived and the roads dried enough for regular travel, Garrett sent word that the sale was finalized. A young farmer named Thomas White was purchasing the property for a sum that, while not generous, was fair enough. The paperwork would be ready to sign within 2 days, and the funds transferred immediately upon completion. Willem and Orthala spent those 2 days in a flurry of final preparations. They packed their supplies carefully, balancing necessity with the limits of what they could carry. Blankets, cookware, a small tent, changes of clothes, what food they could spare, flint and tinder, a few tools, the small amount of coin Willem had saved. It all went into 2 packs that Orthala insisted on carrying the heavier of, her strength making the load manageable where it would have been crushing for Willem. On the final evening, they stood together in the house that had been Willem's home for nearly a decade. It looked bare now, stripped of personal items, just a shell waiting for the next occupant. Willem felt a complicated mix of nostalgia and relief, sadness for what he was leaving and eagerness for what lay ahead. "Any regrets?" Orthala asked, watching him take a last look around. Only that I did not do this sooner. Find something, someone, worth more than isolation. He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. You have given me a reason to live instead of just survive. How could I regret that? They made love one last time in the empty house, a bittersweet farewell to this chapter of their lives, then slept curled together on the bare floor, their pack's pillows beneath their heads. Morning came with golden light and the sound of birds singing their spring songs. Willem and Orthala rose, dressed, shouldered their packs. They walked to the village together, arriving just as the sun cleared the eastern hills. The signing took place in Garrett's office, witnessed by the merchant and Thomas White, an earnest young man who could not quite hide his relief that the orc would be leaving with the previous owner. Money changed hands, papers were stamped and filed, and just like that, Willem Yates was no longer a landowner, just a man with a pack on his back and a future waiting somewhere down the road. They left the village without ceremony or farewell, no one coming to see them off or wish them well. A few faces watched from windows, curtains twitching, but no one spoke. Willem felt the weight of their judgment and disapproval and chose not to care. He had Orthala beside him, her hand warm in his and the open road ahead. They walked south through the warming spring landscape, through forests greening with new growth and fields being prepared for planting. They passed through small settlements where they were met with suspicion and hostility, others where the reception was merely indifferent. They learned to read the character of a place quickly, to know when they were welcome to trade for supplies and when they should keep moving. The journey was harder than Willem had anticipated. His body, softened by winter and months of near starvation, protested the long days of walking. Blisters formed on his feet despite his best efforts, muscles ached, his pack seemed to grow heavier with each mile. Orthala fared better, her orc constitution and strength serving her well, but even she showed signs of fatigue as the days wore into weeks. They camped rough most nights, finding sheltered spots away from the roads, building small fires and sharing their dwindling food supplies. Willem hunted when he could, his old militia skills returning slowly, while Orthala foraged and fished. It was a hand-to-mouth existence, uncertain and sometimes frightening, but they faced it together. In the small hours of the night, when they lay together in their tent listening to the sounds of the wilderness, they would talk about the future they were heading toward. Orthala spoke of wanting to find work that used her strength productively, maybe at a sawmill or construction crew. Willem talked about the possibility of buying land again eventually, something small they could work together. They dreamed aloud of a house they would build, children they might have, the blending of their two worlds into something new and beautiful. "You think our children would be accepted?" Orthala asked one night, her voice small in the darkness. "Half orc, half human." "There are names for people like that, and they are not kind names." "I think our children, if we are blessed with them, will be loved and wanted," Willem said firmly. "And we will raise them to be proud of both halves of their heritage. The world can adjust its opinions accordingly." She laughed softly at that, a sound of mingled hope and skepticism. "You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple, but it is possible, and that is enough for me." They encountered trouble on the road sometimes. Bandits were the worst, desperate men who saw two lone travelers as easy prey. The first time they were confronted, three rough-looking men with knives and cudgels, Willem felt the old militia training surge up. He and Orthala fought back to back, her raw strength and his trained technique combining effectively. They drove the bandits off with injuries on both sides, and afterward, sitting by their fire nursing his bruised ribs and her split knuckles, Willem felt a grim satisfaction. "We make a good team," he said, wincing as Orthala dabbed at his wounds with a cloth soaked in water from a nearby stream. We do, though I hope we do not have to prove it too often. She was gentle despite her strength, her touch careful on his injuries. I do not like seeing you hurt. The feeling is mutual. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. But we can protect each other. That is something. Other travelers they met on the road were a mixed lot. Some gave them wide berth, unwilling to associate with an orc-human pair. Others were more accepting, offering shared meals or information about the road ahead. An elderly couple, human, invited them to camp near their wagon one night and shared a pot of stew that was the best food Willem had tasted in months. The old woman told them that her own daughter had married a half-elf and faced similar prejudice, so she understood something of their struggle. Love is too rare a thing to waste on caring what others think, she told them as they parted ways the next morning. You hold onto each other, and do not let the world's ugliness tarnish what you have. They took that advice to heart, letting it sustain them through the difficult miles that followed. As they traveled further south, the landscape changed. The hills flattened into rolling plains, the forests thinned, and the air grew warmer. They began to encounter more diverse settlements, places where multiple races mingled freely. In one town, they saw orcs and humans working side by side at a blacksmith's forge. In another, a mixed family ran the local inn, and no one seemed to find it remarkable. Willem felt something loosen in his chest with each such encounter, hope growing that the future they dreamed of might actually be possible. 2 months after leaving Willem's farm, footsore and weathered but still together, they crested a hill and saw the ocean for the first time. It stretched to the horizon, vast and blue-green, glittering in the afternoon sun. The sight took Willem's breath away, and beside him Orthala made a small sound of wonder. I have never seen the sea, she whispered. Neither have I, not like this. He pulled her close, both of them standing on that hilltop looking down at the coastal lands below. Somewhere down there is our new home. They descended into the coastal region, passing through larger towns and eventually reaching a settlement called Greenvale, a sizable community that sprawled along the curve of a natural harbor. The town was bustling with activity, ships at dock being loaded and unloaded, markets selling everything from fish to foreign spices, and everywhere, the mix of races that Willem had hoped to find. Humans, orcs, elves, dwarves, even a few goblins working openly in the markets. They found an inn that accepted mixed couples without comment and rented a room for the night, the first proper bed they had slept in since leaving the farm. After washing away weeks of road dust and eating a hot meal that neither of them had to cook, they ventured out to explore. Greenvale was everything they had hoped for. The local laws protected mixed-race unions, and there was an established community of people like them, orc-human couples who had built lives here. They found a notice board in the town square advertising work opportunities, and Orthala's eyes lit up when she saw a posting for laborers at the shipyard. "Building ships," she said, running her finger over the notice. "That is skilled work, good pay. I could do that." Willem scanned the other postings and found one that made his heart beat faster. A farm collective on the outskirts of town was seeking new members, people willing to work the land communally and share in the harvest. It was not the independent homestead he had left behind, but it was a way back to the work he knew and loved. Over the following days, they pursued these opportunities. Orthala interviewed at the shipyard and was hired on the spot when she demonstrated her strength by lifting a heavy beam that usually required 3 men to move. Willem visited the farm collective and met with the organizers, a mixed group who asked good questions about his experience and seemed genuinely pleased to welcome a new member. They found a small cottage to rent on the edge of town, Nothing fancy but clean and sound, with 2 rooms and a little garden plot. It was more expensive than Willem would have liked, but between Orthala's wages from the shipyard and his share from the collective, they could manage it. Slowly, carefully, they began to build a life. Orthala thrived at the shipyard, her strength and precision making her a valued member of the construction crews. She came home each evening tired but satisfied, often with stories of the ships taking shape, the camaraderie among the workers. Willem found deep satisfaction in returning to agricultural work, the familiar rhythms of planting and tending and harvesting. The collective was well organized and welcoming, and he made friends among the other farmers. In the evenings, they would sit in their little cottage and talk about their days, sharing small triumphs and frustrations. They cooked together, experimented with new foods from the markets, slowly replaced their worn traveling gear with proper household items. They were building something real, something that felt permanent in a way Willem had never experienced. 3 months after arriving in Greenvale, Willem asked Orthala if she was ready to make good on their engagement. She said yes without hesitation, her amber eyes bright with joy. They found an officiant through the local community center, a cheerful dwarf woman who specialized in mixed-race unions and did not bat an eye at an orc-human couple. The ceremony was small, held in the cottage garden on a warm summer evening, attended by a few friends they had made in Greenvale. Orthala wore a simple dress they had purchased from the market, green fabric that complemented her skin, and Willem wore his best shirt and trousers, cleaned and pressed. The dwarf officiant spoke about love transcending boundaries, about the courage it took to build a life together in a world that did not always approve. She asked them to speak their vows, and Willem went first, his voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside him. Orthala, when I saw you in that cage, I saw someone who refused to be broken, someone strong and dignified and worth everything I had to give. You have proven me right every day since. You are my partner, my love, my home. I promise to stand with you, to protect you, to cherish you, for all the days I am given. I promise to build a life with you that honors both of our heritages. I promise to love you, fiercely and without reservation, until my last breath. Orthala's eyes were wet, tears tracking down her green cheeks as she spoke her own vows. Willem, you saw me when I had stopped seeing myself. You gave me freedom, and then, even more precious, you gave me choice. You chose me, and I choose you every day. I promise to be your strength when you need it, your softness when you need that instead. I promise to build this life with you, to face whatever comes with courage and honesty. I promise to love you, to honor you, to stand by your side as an equal partner. You are my heart, and I am yours, now and always. They exchanged simple bands they had commissioned from a local metalsmith, silver for Willem, iron for Orthala, each inscribed with the other's name in both common and Orcish script. When the officiant pronounced them married and told Willem to kiss his wife, he did so with joy, pulling Orthala close and feeling like his heart might burst from the fullness of it. Their friends cheered, and there was a small celebration afterward, food and drink and laughter in their garden as the sun set and stars emerged. It was not a grand affair, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Later, when the guests had gone home and they were alone in their cottage, Orthala pulled Willem into their bedroom and made love to him with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaking. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder, Willem felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. "I love you, Mrs. Yates," he said into the darkness. Orthala laughed, the sound rumbling through her chest into his. "I love you too. Though I think I will keep my own name professionally. Orthala is enough, do not you think? Whatever makes you happy, Willem assured her. I just like getting to call you my wife. I like getting to call you my husband. She shifted to look at him, her amber eyes serious. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your farm, your whole life for me? Not for 1 second. That was not a life, Orthala, it was just existence. This, what we have now, this is living. He kissed her forehead. You gave me that. How could I ever regret it? She settled back against him, content, and they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms. The seasons turned. Summer faded into autumn, autumn into a winter that was mild compared to what they had known in the north. The farm collective harvested crops, and Willem brought home his share, a bounty that filled their little larder and reminded him how far they had come from those desperate winter months in his old farmhouse. Orthala continued to excel at the shipyard, earning promotions and respect from her colleagues. They had challenges, of course. Not everyone in Greenvale was accepting, and they faced occasional ugly comments or hostile stares. Once, a group of drunk sailors tried to start a fight with Orthala outside a tavern, shouting slurs and insults. Willem had stepped up beside her, ready to defend her, but Orthala had simply looked at the men with such disdain that they had slunk away, their courage failing. She had turned to Willem afterward and said, I do not need you to fight my battles, but I appreciate that you are always ready to stand with me. They navigated these moments together, learning when to confront prejudice and when to simply walk away, when to educate and when to protect their own peace. It was not always easy, but they had each other, and that made it bearable. In the spring, a year after they had arrived in Greenvale, Orthala discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a complicated mix of joy and terror. They had talked about children in abstract terms, but the reality of it was overwhelming. What would it mean to bring a half-orc child into the world? What challenges would their son or daughter face? But as Orthala's belly grew and they felt the baby move for the first time, a tiny flutter beneath Willem's palm, the fear gave way to fierce protective love. They prepared as best they could, gathering supplies, seeking advice from other mixed-race families in Greenvale, reading everything they could find about caring for infants. The birth was long and difficult, and Willem spent hours pacing outside the midwife's room, hearing Orthala's labored breathing and occasional cries, and feeling utterly helpless. When the midwife finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, and told him he had a daughter, Willem felt his knees go weak with relief. Orthala was pale and drained, lying in the bed with their baby cradled in her arms. The infant was small, her skin a lighter shade of green than her mother's, with tiny tusks barely visible and a shock of black hair. She had Willem's nose and mouth, Orthala's eyes and ears, a perfect blending of both her parents. She is beautiful, Willem breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and reaching out to touch one tiny fist. The baby's fingers curled around his thumb with surprising strength. She is perfect. We made this, Orthala said, wonder in her voice. We made her together. They named her Ilara, a name that worked in both human and orcish tongues, and brought her home to the cottage where they had built their life. The early months were exhausting, endless cycles of feeding and changing and soothing, but also filled with moments of transcendent joy. Watching Orthala nurse their daughter, seeing the tenderness in her amber eyes, made Willem fall in love with her all over again. Ilara grew quickly, showing the robust health of her orc heritage combined with the curiosity of her human side. She was loud and demanding and absolutely fearless, crawling before she was 6 months old and walking before her first birthday. The neighbors in Greenvale welcomed her, often stopping by to coo over the baby or offer hand-me-down clothes and advice. Willem and Orthala navigated parenthood together, supporting each other through the hard nights and celebrating the milestones. Orthala went back to work at the shipyard after a few months, and Willem adjusted his schedule at the collective to be home more, caring for Alara during the days. They traded off, shared the load, and marveled at how their capacity for love seemed to expand infinitely to encompass this small person they had created. On Alara's first birthday, they threw a party in their garden, inviting friends and neighbors and the other families they had grown close to. Watching their daughter smash cake into her face with gleeful abandon, seeing her surrounded by people who loved and accepted her, Willem felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "We did it," he said to Orthala, pulling her close as they watched their daughter play. "We built this life, this family, this community. Against all the odds, we did it." "We did," Orthala agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And it is more than I ever dreamed possible back in that cage." Willem thought about that day, which felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. He thought about the choice he had made, to put down his entire harvest for an orc girl he did not know, driven by nothing more than the conviction that it was the right thing to do. It had seemed crazy then, impulsive and reckless, but it had led to this, to a wife he adored, a daughter he cherished, a life rich with meaning and connection. "You know what I am grateful for," he said. "That slaver asking too much. If he had priced you lower, someone else would have bought you, and I would have walked away. I would have gone back to my farm and my lonely existence and never known what I was missing. You would have saved your harvest," Orthala pointed out with a smile, "and lost everything that mattered." He turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands. "I would trade 1,000 harvests for one day with you and Alara. You are my abundance, Orthala. You and our daughter, this life we have built. That is the real harvest." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and in the background their daughter laughed at something one of the other children was doing, the sound pure and joyful. The sun was warm on their faces, their garden was full of friends, and the future stretched out before them, unknown but no longer frightening. They had found their home, not in a place but in each other, and that was worth everything they had sacrificed and more. The slavers had wanted 10 silver for the orc girl, and a plain farmer had put down his entire harvest instead. It had been the best trade of Willem Yates's life, and he would make it again in a heartbeat, every single time. Years continued to pass in Greenvale, each one adding new layers to the life that Willem and Orthala had built together. Alara grew into a bright, energetic child who asked endless questions and showed aptitude for both physical pursuits and academic learning. She attended the local school, where the mixed population meant she was just one of many children straddling different heritages. She made friends easily, her outgoing nature and fearlessness endearing her to classmates and teachers alike. Willem watched his daughter navigate the world with a confidence he had never possessed at her age, and he marveled at what he and Orthala had created. She was proof that love could bridge any divide, that the prejudices and fears that had shaped their own lives need not define the next generation. Orthala became a foreman at the shipyard, supervising her own crew and earning wages that helped them save toward a long-held dream, buying land of their own. Not to isolate themselves as Willem had done before, but to have space for a larger garden, maybe some animals, room for Alara to run and explore. They began looking at properties on the outskirts of Greenvale, small plots that they could afford and build upon. On a warm autumn day, when Alara was 5 years old, they found it. A few acres of gently rolling land with a small stream running through it, close enough to town for convenience but far enough for privacy. There was an old barn that needed work, and the remnants of a stone foundation where a house had once stood. It was imperfect and would require significant labor to make livable, but it had potential. What do you think? Willem asked Orthala as they stood on the property, watching Orthala chase butterflies through the tall grass. I think it is perfect, she said, slipping her hand into his. I think we can build something beautiful here. They made an offer that was accepted, and suddenly they were landowners again, but this time together. The collective allowed Willem to take a reduced schedule, and Orthala negotiated for weekends off, so they could dedicate time to building their homestead. With help from friends and neighbors, they began the work. The house rose slowly from the old foundation, built with timber and stone and the labor of many hands. It was larger than Willem's old farmhouse had been, with enough rooms for their growing family and guests who might visit. They designed it together, Orthala's practical engineering knowledge combining with Willem's farming experience to create something both functional and warm. Orthala helped in her own way, carrying small tools and fetching water and generally getting underfoot while asking questions about every aspect of the construction. She wanted to know why they built this way, what each tool did, how the different materials worked together. Willem and Orthala answered patiently, teaching her even as they built. By the time Orthala turned 6, the house was finished enough to move into, though work continued on finishing touches and outbuildings. They held a small ceremony, just the 3 of them, where they walked through each room and blessed it in both human and orcish traditions. Orthala spoke words in her native language about strength and shelter, and Willem added prayers for health and happiness that his mother had taught him long ago. "This is our home," Orthala declared with the absolute certainty of childhood, "our real home that we built ourselves." "That is right, little one," Orthala said, swinging her daughter up into her arms. "This is where we belong." They settled into a new rhythm, commuting to their respective jobs but coming home to land that was theirs, where they could grow food and raise animals and live more self-sufficiently. Willem planted fruit trees and expanded the vegetable garden. Orthala built a workshop where she could practice carpentry and metalwork in her spare time. Orthala started a collection of small animals, convinced she could tame every rabbit and bird that crossed their property. 2 years later, Orthala gave birth to their second child, a son they named Darius. He came faster than Orthala had, arriving in the early hours of a spring morning with a lusty cry that woke half the house. Unlike his sister's blended features, Darius looked more purely orcish, his skin a deeper green, his tusks more prominent even as an infant. But he had Willem's brown eyes and his gentle temperament, seeming content to observe the world quietly where Orthala had always demanded to engage with it immediately. Orthala was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding. She took her role as big sister seriously, often telling Darius stories about their family or singing him songs she made up on the spot. Willem and Orthala watched their children together and felt their hearts expand impossibly further. The world outside Greenvale continued to be complicated. There were still regions where mixed-race families faced persecution, where laws forbade the kinds of unions Willem and Orthala represented. News reached them occasionally of violence against orcs in human territories, or humans killed in orcish raids on the frontier. The old hatreds and conflicts had not disappeared just because some communities had found ways to coexist peacefully. But in Greenvale and the surrounding region, things were different. The port town had become a beacon for those seeking tolerance and opportunity, and the population swelled with refugees and immigrants from less accepting places. Willem and Orthala found themselves part of an informal network of mixed families who supported each other, shared resources, and advocated for policies that protected their rights. When Alara was 10 and Darius was 2, representatives from several mixed-race communities came together to form what they called the Harmony Council, an organization dedicated to promoting peaceful coexistence and defending the rights of blended families. Orthala was asked to serve as a representative from Greenvale, given her standing in the community and her personal story. She was hesitant at first, uncertain about taking on such a public role. But Willem encouraged her, knowing she had wisdom and perspective that could help others. So Orthala joined the council, traveling occasionally to meetings in other towns, speaking about her experiences and learning from others who had walked similar paths. Willem supported her in this new endeavor, managing the household and children during her absences, proud of the leader she was becoming. He continued his work with the farm collective and their own homestead, finding satisfaction in the cycles of planting and harvest, in teaching his children about the land and how to care for it. Their life was not without struggles. Money was sometimes tight, especially with 2 children and a mortgage on their property. They had disagreements and arguments like any couple, usually about small things that took on outsized importance when they were tired or stressed. Orthala sometimes struggled with the weight of representing her people, the expectations and judgments that came with being a public figure. Willem occasionally felt the pull of his old isolation, the temptation to retreat from the complexities of community involvement and just focus on his family and land. But they always came back to each other, remembering what they had overcome to be together, choosing daily to honor the vows they had made. They talked through their problems, compromised, apologized when necessary, and forgave readily. They made it work because the alternative, losing what they had built, was unthinkable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Willem surprised Orthala by recreating their wedding ceremony in their garden, this time with Alara and Darius as witnesses. He spoke new vows about the decade they had shared and the decades he hoped still lay ahead, about the family they had created and the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. Orthala cried, which she rarely did, and spoke her own vows about how Willem had shown her what it meant to be truly seen and valued, about how their partnership had exceeded every dream she had dared to dream in that cage so many years ago. Alara and Darius presented them with gifts they had made, drawings and small crafts that were treasured more than anything money could buy. They ate cake that Willem had baked himself, somewhat lopsided but delicious, and danced in the garden as the sun set. Later, when the children were asleep and they sat on their porch looking out over their land, Orthala said, "Do you remember that day in the village square, when you first saw me?" "Every detail," Willem assured her. "I remember thinking your eyes held more dignity than anyone in that crowd, and being angry that you had to sit in chains. I remember seeing you step forward, this plain human farmer, and thinking you were going to be just like all the others, another person who saw me as property or a tool." She shook her head. "I have never been happier to be wrong about someone. We have built something good, have we not?" Willem gestured to the house, the land, the life surrounding them, something worth all the struggle. "We have built something extraordinary," Orthala corrected. "And we are not done yet. There is still so much ahead of us." She was right. In the years that followed, they continued to grow and evolve. Alara developed a passion for shipbuilding like her mother, apprenticing at the shipyard when she was old enough. Darius showed talent for healing magic, a rare gift that led him to study with the town's medical practitioners. Willem and Orthala watched their children pursue their own paths, and felt pride in the individuals they were becoming. The Harmony Council expanded its influence, successfully lobbying for legal protections for mixed-race families in several territories. Orthala's role in that effort earned her recognition beyond Greenvale, and she was invited to speak at gatherings across the region. She always came home afterward to Willem and their children, grounding herself in the life they had built together. Willem took on a leadership role in the farm collective, teaching new members and helping to expand their operations. He developed new farming techniques suited to the coastal climate and shared them freely with others. The collective thrived under the guidance of its members, becoming a model for sustainable agriculture that other communities sought to replicate. Their homestead became a gathering place for the mixed-race community in Greenvale, a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over prejudice. They hosted celebrations and meetings, offered shelter to travelers and refugees, became pillars of a society that valued diversity and inclusion. On a spring morning 20 years after that day in the village square, Willem stood in his field and looked back at his house. Orthala was on the porch, her hair now streaked with gray, calling something to Alara, who was visiting with her own partner. Darius was in the garden, tending to the healing herbs he cultivated for his practice. The scene was one of domestic harmony, family and purpose and belonging. Willem thought about that younger version of himself, lonely and isolated on a failing farm, watching a slave auction and making a decision that changed everything. He thought about walking away from his entire harvest, gambling his survival on a stranger's dignity and his own conscience. It had been the right choice. More than right, it had been the best choice, the one that led to everything good in his life. The harvest he gave up had been just grain, finite and temporary. What he had gained was infinite and eternal, love and family and a legacy that would outlive him. Orthala looked up from the porch and caught his eye, smiling that small smile that still made his heart beat faster after all these years. He smiled back and started walking toward the house, toward his wife and his children and the life they had built together. The slavers had wanted 10 silver for the orc girl. A plain farmer had put down his entire harvest instead, and in return he had received everything that mattered, everything that made life worth living. It had been, without question, the best trade any person could ever make. He climbed the porch steps and pulled Orthala into his arms, kissing her soundly while their daughter laughed and their son pretended not to notice. This was his abundance, his harvest, his everything, and he would be grateful for it for all the days he was given and beyond.